Lost Generation, coming at you with another story time. What I'm going to talk about today is the first time I stabbed somebody. And I just want to address this right now. The first time I stabbed somebody was unintentional, and it was an accident. But there's a lesson to be learned in this story. And anyone that knows me or grew up with me is familiar with this story, and they'll recognize it right away. But let's begin. I think I was 16 at the time, and I went to a party where everyone was drinking. It was at this party spot that was really starting to blow up, and we partied there every weekend for 2 or 3 years, even though it was within sight of a police station. So that's pretty wild. I don't know how this place didn't get busted earlier than it did, but a bunch of people had showed up from other towns, and there was these girls there from out of town, and one of my friends is trying to show off in front of these girls, so he started trying to grapple with me and all that, and I got the better of him, and he spent part of the night stewing about it, and he decided to make another play on me, and unluckily for him, I had sensed him coming from behind, and I was able to sidestep, sweep his legs, and then take him to the ground and drop my knee into his back. Well, it just so happened that his face was a few feet away from these girls, and they had saw him go down, me drop the knee in his back, so he was a little upset about that. And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to mess with him a little bit. So he was sitting there in a reclining chair, and I had this new knife that the blade came out of the front. So I deployed it, and I was just going to mess with him, so I went up to him and held it up in the air like I was going to stab him, which obviously I wasn't planning on doing, but it happened anyways, because he assumed I was going to punch him, so he put his hands up in the air to try to block my punch or prevent me from hitting him. Either way, he didn't see the knife that I was holding, and his hands went straight into my blade, which pierced one of his wrists. And it wasn't as bad as he thought it was, but he started panicking really bad. And the worst thing you can do whenever you're severely wounded or you're bleeding traumatically is to panic. And that should be another lesson that's taken out of this video. If you ever get stabbed, shot, limb severely broken, or there's blood, don't panic. Panic will raise your heartbeat, your blood pressure, and it's going to make you lose blood faster. And if you convince yourself that it's worse than it is, psychologically speaking, that's going to actually make it worse. So if you get wounded traumatically, don't panic. Keep a cool head. Well, he didn't have that knowledge at the time, and he started panicking. So he started running to the bathroom with blood spurting out of his wrist. And I still remember the reaction of the people at this party. Not a single person tried to help this kid. In fact, everybody was calling other people and telling them they had to get over to this party to see that he had been stabbed and check out all the drama and pandemonium. And I still remember a buddy of mine had started rolling a blunt on a table in the dining room when this happened. And during all this pandemonium, people running around, calling people, this kid panicking, starting to bleed out, he never stopped rolling the blunt. Even though he knew the cops and ambulance and stuff would end up there, he's just sitting there rolling this blunt like nothing even happened, like no one just got stabbed. So, no one helps this guy except for me. And of course, I had a lot of incentive to help this guy because it was my blade that pierced his wrist. So, I went into the bathroom with him, and I rinsed his wrist off real quick with warm water, and then I held pressure on his wrist. And the whole time, he was looking up at me with a pale face, and he kept screaming, "I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die." And I basically had to slap him and then look him in the face and tell him, "You're not gonna die, quit freaking out." And then I put a tourniquet on his arm. I took my belt off. I put a tourniquet on his forearm to try to stem the blood loss. And unfortunately, since I was the only one that would help him, I had to wait right there with him until the police and ambulance showed up. And I handed off my knife to a friend of mine who stashed it in the couch at the house. And then I had to stand there while the police were right there asking him who stabbed him. And he made up a fake name and said that the guy had left. But there was a problem with that. The fake name that he gave them was actually the name of one of my relatives. But, you know, who could have known the odds? So, luckily, I didn't get in trouble for this whole debacle. But there's a lot of lessons to be learned here. Number one, don't play with knives, especially if you're drinking or smoking or doing drugs. Don't play with knives. Next lesson, don't panic if you have traumatic blood loss. Next lesson, impressing girls isn't worth getting stabbed over. I would be remiss if I did not include the fact that several days after this incident, I went to school, and every single one of my teachers knew that I stabbed this kid. But the story, like a game of telephone, had changed from me accidentally stabbing my friend to me being some sort of wild maniac that intentionally stabbed him out of malice. But the crazy part about that is none of my teachers thought that was a bad thing, because apparently they did not like this guy. And I actually had teachers congratulating me on stabbing one of my friends. Is that not unbelievable? Teachers at school congratulating you for stabbing somebody who is also going to that school? I just consider myself lucky that none of them tried to get me into trouble, but it's pretty messed up if you think about it. Lost. We're really out this time.